This year, it's a bit of a change of pace because I'm discussing a number of biblical works, of course with halachic background, as you'll see. Esther, Miriam, and Ruth, 3 heroines, 3 festivals, Passover, Purim, Passover, and Shavuot, and 3 different types of redemption. And I'd like to mention that what I'm going to try to do with you this evening is to give quintessentially the philosophy of Judaism through the Hebrew calendar. Because an understanding of these 3 festivals, what is similar about them and what is different about them, will teach us novels about what Judaism really is all about, what our narrative truly is, and what our responsibility towards it is. And it's important for me to say at the outset that there are a number of fundamental problems I hope to respond to within this discussion. First of all, I'm starting with Purim, even though Purim is not really one of the spring festivals. Because Purim comes out in the month of Adar, which is before the month of Nisan, before Tkufat HaAviv, the period of the spring. Nevertheless, Purim is indelibly linked with Pesach, as the Gemara says very well, when Adar has 2 months in a leap year, and we should logically celebrate Purim on the 1st Adar, because mitzvah haba liyadcha al tachmitzenu. Do a mitzvah as quickly as you can. Nevertheless, the Gemara links the 14th and 15th days of Adar, Purim and Shushan Purim, with the 14th and 15th days of Nisan, the festival of the Korban Pesach, and the festival of Matzot. So the Gemara links Purim and Pesach. There's one other thing which links Purim and Pesach, and that is the drinking of wine. On Purim, Masechet Megillah, Daf Zayin Amid Bet, Omar Rava, Mechayiv Inish Levasume Bepuria, Ad Delo Yada Bein Arur Haman Ubaruch Mordechai. It's incumbent upon a person to get drunk on Purim until he can no longer distinguish between cursing Haman and praising Mordechai. And of course, the Shulchan Aruch, Tafayin Bet, Hilchot Pesach, it's a mitzvah, a commandment to drink the 4 cups of wine. Having said that it's a mitzvah to drink the 4 cups of wine, it's also clear as far as Pesach is concerned that we cannot drink to inebriation. As a matter of fact, it is initially forbidden to drink anything between the 3rd and 4th cups. Shema yishtaker, lest he become inebriated. Whereas on Purim, the commandment seems to be to get drunk. This is a very difficult halacha. On a personal level, it's my wife's only rebellion We're going to be married, please God, 50 years. I am still very much in love, Baruch Hashem. We've had a wonderful, wonderful life together and are very thankful to HaKadosh Baruch Hu every minute. And there are no rebellions. There have never been any really big arguments, Baruch Hashem. Except once. The first 3 years of our married life, I was teaching at Yeshiva University. I invited my students for Purim. The first year, students threw up over the sofa in the living room. The second year, the students threw up over the sofa in the living room. And the third year, the students threw up over the sofa in the living room. And my wife said, since we come from Brooklyn, 3 strikes, you're out. There will not be a Purim Seudah in my house again. So for the last 47 years, I've gone to the yeshiva for the Purim Seudah. Luckily, I always have a yeshiva to go to. Baruch Hashem. However, it is very much out of character. Parshat Shmini, after the deaths of the 2 sons of Aaron, Nadav and Avihu, the Torah in Sefer Vayikra, the book of Leviticus, in Shmini says that it's forbidden to enter the temple inebriated. It's important to be able to distinguish between what is pure and what is impure. So what does it mean that on Purim get drunk until you can no longer distinguish between cursing Haman and praising Mordechai? It doesn't sound right. My second big question relates to Pesach. You know, Pesach is a great deal of cleaning and extirpating all of the chametz which may be in the home. And the Mishnah says, the beginning of Masechet Pesachim, that on the 14th day of Nisan, it's necessary to destroy all of the chametz, all of the leavening in your entire domain. And to search for that chametz by the light of a candle. And one of the reasons why we're so strict on Pesach, much more than during the entire year, is because Pesach, there's no such thing as nullification on Pesach itself. The slightest bit of chametz will render the entire mixture verboten, forbidden. So everyone is very concerned. And the verses which surround the light of the candle, as the Gemara quotes them, page 7, in the tractate Psachim, what the Gemara says is, quotes one verse, that God will search Jerusalem with a candle for the sins that will prevent the coming of the Messiah. And once those sins are routed out, then the Messiah will come. But God is searching with a candle for the sins. The second verse cited by the Gemara, Neir Hashem Nishmat Adam. The candle of the Lord is the soul of the human being. Chofes kol chadrei baten. Searches the innermost parts of every human being. It's clear from these verses, clear from this discussion, that the search is not merely an external search for leavening, That's a symbolic thing. Alongside of that search, and that search, I don't mean to say symbolic that it's not real. Of course it's a real search. But it stands for something beyond the physical search. Chametz is associated with the leavening in the dough, which is the rabbinic expression for the evil instinct and evil desire within the human being. We're trying to rout out the dark places within our personalities. We're trying to cleanse inwardly, not only outwardly. And this is agreed upon by the Talmud and by all of the commentaries I know. Rationalists as well as Kabbalists. And that's my second problem. Because you see, we spoke about the relationship between Purim and Pesach. There's a tremendous relationship between Pesach and Shavuot. There's even a linguistic relationship that's very profound. Pesach is Sipur, the mitzvah of telling the story of Egypt. Sipur, followed by counting the days and the weeks, Sefirot, culminating in the giving of the Torah at Sinai at the end of the 7th week on the 50th day. When the Jews had God's revelation, and God appeared to them, Kima'aseh livnata sapir, like the white of the blue sapphire. Sipur begins Pesach. The 7 weeks are Sefirot, Sipur, Sefirot, and then Sapir, when God was seen. So even linguistically, in a magnificent way, Pesach, the intermediary days, and Shavuot are linked together. And the intermediary days are very significant, the counting of the weeks. Mimocharat Shabbat, from the second day of Passover, you begin counting, so it starts with Pesach. And at that time, we would bring the barley offering, the Omer, and it concluded on Pesach, on Shavuot, thank you, with the first fruits and the wheat offering. And they brought 2 loaves of bread. That was the major gift on Shavuot. Chametz te'ofena. It must be baked with leavening. Now the Ramban goes so far as to suggest that this entire period from the beginning of Pesach until Shavuot is one long festival. And all the days are the intermediary days of the festival. And therefore, the last day, which is Shavuot and is the climax of the festival, is called Atzeret. In Greek, exodion, the conclusion. And that's why Shavuot is only one day, according to the Ramban. So if it's one festival, and if Chametz is evil, Yetzer Hara, evil instinct, evil desire, Satan, I had to rout it out. How come in the climax I go back to it? And my major offering is 2 loaves of bread, and specifically bread. I go on to tell you that the Mishnah says that on the Seder night, we expound the verses that come from Deuteronomy Ki Tavo, Arami Oved Avi, until the conclusion of the entire portion. If you check it within the Bible, you'll see as clearly as day. That's not what we do. The Seder night is a night of Torah study as well. The rabbis of the Haggadah chose an amazing quintessential discussion of the Egyptian experience, which is written in the first person. Vayeled Mitzrayma, Vayareu otanu hamitzrim. The Egyptians acted evilly against us. Vayanunu, and they afflicted us. Vanitzak el Hashem Elokeinu, and we cried out to the Lord our God. V'yotzienu, and he took us out with great wonders. It goes on to say, it's first person, that's why everyone must feel as if he himself came out of Egypt. That's why we choose that particular portion from the book of Deuteronomy and not third person from the book of Exodus, but first person from the book of Deuteronomy. It's the chapter of the first fruits. When the Jew brings the first fruits, this is his speech. So within the Pesach Haggadah, we already have a glimpse into the festival of the first fruits, which is wonderful, the end of the period. But there are two more verses. And now God has brought us to the land of Israel, and here we are with our first fruits. And those verses are deleted from our Haggadah. Very strange. If the Mishnah says we should read until the end of the portion, then I would say we should read until the end of the portion. Why do we cut out the last two lines? And then I come to Shavuot. One might think that there are two central points of focus within the Hebrew calendar. The spring festivals, Pesach, Shavuot, which are basically national festivals. And I added Purim. Very national. The birth of the Jewish nation, the Torah that God gave us, the bringing of the first fruits to the temple in Jerusalem. And then, in the fall, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Sukkot, Shmini Atzeret, which are very universal. Rosh Hashanah, Hayom Harat Olam, today the world was conceived. Yom Kippur, for my house shall be a house of prayer for all nations. Sukkot, we bring offering for all 70 nations. And of course, Shmini Atzeret, rain, which is universally needed. So there is the national festivals and the universal festivals. So how come we read Megillat Ruth on Shavuot, which deals with a Moabite woman entering into the fold of Judaism? Why do we deal with Moabites altogether? I thought these are the national festivals, we should be dealing with Jews. Those are my basic issues. And now let's go step by step and try to understand the three festivals, the three different types of redemption, and what this means. And I want to start with the scroll of Esther. The Scroll of Esther is a very difficult book. And I'm going to ask a very quick question. How many of you still live in the diaspora, unfortunately? Let me see your hands. Okay. Pretty nice sprinkling. I'll add that if your children live here, you live here. No matter where else you might live. And if you have a house here, you also live here. But let me go to my tale, or my interpretation. If I'm going to date Megillat Esther, the date would be as follows. Probably around 525 BCE. Ahasuerus is considered to be the emperor of Persia between Cyrus and Darius. Cyrus gave permission to the Jews to return to Judea. So therefore, since the book of Esther takes place after Cyrus, it tells us about the Jews of Persia. The largest Jewish community was then living in Persia. And 85% of world Jews then lived in Persia. Only about 15% decided to come to Israel. So it tells what happens to Jews when they could come to Israel and they vote with their feet to stay in the diaspora. Now, why did they decide to stay in the diaspora? The reason is very simple. For financial reasons and for security reasons. So the book of Esther tells us what problems will they find. And now let's look at the book of Esther. It opens with a description of the palace of Ahasuerus. Chur, Karpas, Tchelet, Argaman. Hangings of white linen and majestic blue and purple, exactly reminiscent of the sanctuary. And there's a picture as if, for the Jews who lived in Persia, the palace of Ahasuerus took the place of God's sanctuary. We meet Esther and Mordechai. Strange names. Esther's real name is Hadassah. That's a beautiful Hebrew name. Esther is Ishtar, a goddess, a Persian goddess, a Zoroastrian goddess of beauty. Mordechai, Marduk, a god of war. Now, there are many Jews in the diaspora who have such names. I've had students named Mark and Luke. However, it does say something, not about them, but about their parents, for giving such names. Then there's a big party. And all the Jews are invited. And they eat and they drink. But the party is in Ahasuerus' house. I don't think Ahasuerus was a Shomer Shabbat so that you could eat in his house, no matter how delectable the food may be. Nothing is mentioned in the Megillah about Badatz Hashgacha, or even Rabbanut Hashgacha, or even OU Hashgacha. And the Midrash says the Jews were worthy of destruction simply because they enjoyed this feast of Ahasuerus. And then Esther is taken in a strange contest, a nighttime contest, a sexual contest. And although she is taken, Vatilakeches Esther, she is not raped, Vateanes Esther, For 6 months, she undergoes all sorts of perfumings, and she doesn't refuse to do that in preparation for the contest. There seems to be no tension about her going. And Mordechai even tells her not to tell about her Jewish background. And Ibn Ezra even suggests, and although he rejects his suggestion makes a heck of a lot of sense to me, Mordechai and Esther wanted her to become the queen, just like Kissinger wanted to become the Secretary of State. And the Gemara cries out in Sanhedrin Ayin Dalid. The Gemara cries out, Sanhedrin 74, Esther b'farhes Yahavai. She was living with a Gentile publicly, which is a death penalty for which you should give up your life before you do it. The Gemara answers she was completely passive. But it seems to me, even though this is hardly my expertise, if she were completely passive, she wouldn't have won the contest. Therefore, it seems to me that the picture that we have is a community in the midst of grave assimilation. And God's name doesn't appear because God doesn't figure so greatly in this book. Now, there's a very, very interesting 2 verses in the book of Exodus, chapters 6 and 7. The first exile of the Jewish people. And the people of Israel were fruitful and swarming and multiplying and strengthening very, very much, and the land was filled with them. An interesting description. How many of you think it's a positive description? Let's see hands. How many think it was positive? How many think it was negative? Why, most of you are not thinking. Those who think it's negative, someone tell me why. Yes. Good. He meant to say ladies first, but that's fine. That's fine. Swarming is for insects. And the Midrash picks up on it. They went to all the wrong places. The discos, the bars. The very next verse is fascinating. And a new Pharaoh arose who did not know Joseph. And he made very harsh decrees. And what this tells me is the history of the Jews in the diaspora. It's as if God says to the Jewish people, I have a covenant with you, and you're supposed to live forever, because you have a job to do. However, that can only be if you live Jewish lives. If you assimilate, and you don't live Jewish lives, you're going to disappear. But I have a covenant with you, and God does not repent of his covenants. So therefore, says God, I will be forced to send a cruel tyrant who will remind you that you are Jews by his evil decrees, and won't allow you to assimilate because he'll make you subhuman. And the nations round about, the Gentile world, will not marry you or let you into their country clubs or their bars or their discos, and they won't let you assimilate. That's a pretty important rule of the Jewish diaspora. The twin scourges of the Jewish diaspora is assimilation dash into marriage, and anti-Semitism. And that can be more difficult for Jewish survival than the financial and security issues which kept the Jews in Persia. And that's precisely what happened. Haman began to rule. And Haman was a very difficult ruler. And Haman was going to kill out all the Jews. Reminded the Jews that they were Jews. And then Mordechai makes a demonstration. Esther is upset with him because then their cover will be gone and everyone will know that she's Jewish. And what will happen? And Mordechai says the most important words in all of Tanakh. Al tedami benafshech, don't imagine in your mind that if all of the Jews are destroyed, you will be saved because you will be in the palace of the king. The salvation will come from another place. God will see to that. But if you're quiet at this moment, you and your entire history will go into oblivion. And then Esther comes forward, reveals herself as a Jewess, changes everything around, puts her life on the line, and saves the Jews. An important book. But let me tell you something. At the end of the day, with all the success at the end and Haman is hanged, the Gemara concludes, we don't say Hallel on Purim, Psalms of Praise. Because Akate Avdei Da'achashveroshanan. The only thing that happened in Persia was temporary survival. Esther is still in the bedroom of Achashverosh, the king. Can always have another Haman next month. And perhaps then he won't be quite so fond of Esther. And the Jews will be destroyed indeed. And even that temporary kind of respite. Listen to the words of the Gemara. Amarava. Machayev inish levasume bepuria ad lo yada bein arur Haman levaruch Mordechai. A person has to get drunk until he can no longer distinguish between cursing Haman and praising Mordechai. Let me suggest what this means. Who was the real hero of the Persian Megillat Esther story? Esther? Mordechai? Who else? Haman. He reminded them that they were Jews. You're absolutely correct. And listen to me very well. In order to rejoice, because Haman reminded us that we were Jews in the way that he did, you need a lot of wine to make you happy. I once had a wonderful Rosh Yeshiva of Pelev, Yeshiva University. And on Simchas Torah, when I was in the yeshiva, we went from Rebbe to Rebbe. We came to him a little bashushkit. You know what bashushkit means? Basume. And he said, let me teach you boys the real lesson of drinking. If you're happy inside and you're expressing it with a drink, that'll be a drink of joy and salvation. If you're empty inside and you want the drink to put in the happiness, that will be drunkenness and forgetfulness. So if you drink because you were saved only by dint of a Haman reminding you that you were Jews, that's not anything to truly rejoice over. So in my opinion, Purim is a kind of anti-festival. And the truth is that the Shiltot and the Meiri put it very well. Levasume means to get drunk in Aramaic, and Levasume Bosem means fragrance in Hebrew. And they say it best. If when you drink on Purim, what comes out of your mouth are words of praise to God, because after all, at the end of the day we survived, that's okay. You can drink and celebrate. But if that's not what's going to come out of your mouth, then you better not begin to drink. And that I believe in. So therefore, Purim is a mixed bag. It's only survival. It has nothing at all to do with redemption. And because the drinking on Purim is so different than the drinking on Pesach, that's why Pesach, you can't get drunk at all. Pesach, it's the redemption. It's the fact that we were freed from slavery. That's what makes the whole difference. And hear me very well. At the end of the Megillah, Akate Avdei Dachashverosh Shanan, we're still slaves of Achashverosh. Esther is still in the bedroom of the king. According to the Midrash, Darius, the king under whom the Holy Temple was completed in Judea, was the son of Mordechai and of Esther and Achashverosh. There isn't even a Jewish family in Persia among the heroes of this story. Survival without even a Jewish family. Assimilation in the palace of the king, overtaking the number one heroine. That's the story, ultimately, in the diaspora. Pesach is different. And Pesach is different on two counts. First of all, Pesach is different because it truly, truly speaks of Jewish family. Miriam is the major persona. Miriam protects her brother Moshe. According to the Midrash, Miriam tells her father Amram, because the baby boys were thrown into the Nile River to be killed, and Amram made a decree that Jews shouldn't have children because if they would be males, they would be killed. Miriam says to her father, "You are worse than Pharaoh, because you're stopping the birth of girls and boys." You're making Jewish family life impossible. And Amram listened to his daughter and realized that she was correct. And we emerged Pesach, free from slavery. And that was very important. But nevertheless, the Jewish family intact, and by the way, because the Jewish family is intact, the celebration of Pesach is ish sel bayit, a lamb for every household, and arel lo yeyachel bo, someone who is not Jewish, who is uncircumcised, cannot partake of the Paschal lamb. It's a Jewish festival, a Jewish family festival, because that's what made it coming out of Egypt. What is fascinating is that it's still not redemption by a long shot. And it's not redemption by a long shot. Simply because we got out of Egypt only insofar as the desert. We didn't get to Israel. We didn't get to our homeland. And we didn't get the Torah. And understand the importance of this. That's why, according to the Gemara, Brachot Lametet Amud Bet, Brachot 39b, we take only 2 matzot on the Seder night. And that's my custom too. Not 3, but 2. That's what it seems very clearly from the Gemara. The Gemara says that on Pesach, you take the broken matzah and place it within the whole matzah and make the blessing. They had soft matzot in Talmudic times. There are some Edot HaMizrach that know how to make it that way, like pita. And that's what they did. Rashi and Tosfot asked the question, but what about Lechem Mishnah? Every Chag we have Lechem Mishnah, 2 whole matzot, 2 whole chalot. And therefore they added the 3rd matzah for Lechem Mishnah. The Rambam specifically says no Lechem Mishnah, because Lechem Oni trumps Lechem Mishnah. The half matzah. We're still aniyim, poor. We're not slaves, but as long as we're not in the land of Israel, we're poor. We're poor spiritually, and we're poor physically. Please understand this very well. You see, to be free, really free, you have to have freedom of choice completely. And you have to be able to do what you really want to do. You can never do that as a slave. And it's difficult to do that if you're really poverty-stricken. A land gives you 2 things. It's also difficult if you don't have an ideal and goal to know what really to do with your time. So having a land is critically important. Because the land gives you physical sustenance. From the land you get physical sustenance. A land makes certain that the culture is going to be your culture and not a different foreign culture that can be easily imposed upon you. And the land very often has natural resources that will give you strength. Ultimately, monetary and military. You know, President Obama had a very good trip this time. He didn't agree with us 100%. Of course not. But he gave us latitude, and he said all the right things about Jews and our rights to the land. You know why? Because we have power. And he needs our power vis-a-vis Syria and vis-a-vis Iran. Perhaps power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. But nothing corrupts as much as powerlessness. So that's very important. And our land, very, very important. We didn't have that on Pesach. It's still lechem oni. It's half Hallel for most of Pesach. At least half Hallel, and the first day it's complete Hallel, so it's not like Purim, which is barely survival. It is freedom from slavery, but without a homeland. And without a whole Torah. They give us a mission. And this I want you to understand very well. See, when God first chose Abraham, he chose Abraham very specifically and deliberately. He says to Abraham, "Va'escha l'goy gadol, I will make you a great nation." That means a land. The land, that was the covenant. Genesis 12:3. I will make you a great nation. And all the families of the earth will be blessed through you. How? Genesis 18, verses 18 and 19. God says, your seed will bless all the families of the earth. I have known him, Abraham, Yedativ, loved him, chosen him. Leman asher yitzaveh et beito ve'et banav acharav, in order that he teach his household and children after him, l'shmor derech Hashem, to guard the ways of the Lord, la'asot tzedakah u'mishpat, to do compassionate righteousness and moral justice. We have to teach the world, but we cannot teach the world without a land of our own, without a culture of our own. We needed the whole Torah for that too. Because before the Decalogue, which came only after Pesach, we got the charge from God to be a holy nation and a kingdom of priest teachers. Goy kadosh umamlechet kohanim. The Seforno says to teach the world the ways of God. May surprise you. We are a missionary religion. The Rambam says we must teach the world the 7 moral laws. If we don't teach that to the world, there will be no world. There will be Ahmadinejads who will destroy the world. We must teach the world that every human being is inviolate, created in the image of God. We must teach the world that every individual has the right to be free. That's Jewish, adopted by America. That's the Bible. That's Tzelem Elokim. That's the Exodus from Egypt. We can't do it unless the world respects us, unless we're dealing with the same problems that the world deals with. That's why, Ve'escha l'goy gadol, I will make you a great nation. And then you'll be the blessing for the world. They'll learn from you. So now we come to Shavuot. And that's fundamentally the message of Shavuot. We got the whole Torah. We know what to expose the world to. Do you know, just to check me, I want you to think about this because most people don't understand it. And it's an ABC of Judaism. Look at the Rambam Sefer HaMitzvot, Mitzvah Gimel. The third commandment, you shall love the Lord your God. How does the Rambam explain it? How do you love God? You try to get to know God. How do you get to know God? You study His Torah and mitzvot, and you study the world. Science. The glories of God in science. And then the Rambam continues, make sure that God becomes beloved to the world through you, which means you have to teach the same thing to everybody. And the Gemara, in Masechet Brachot, Daf Nun Zayin Amid Bet, in the words of Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar, everyone will ultimately convert. We don't force conversion, but we should expose them. Because our message is a very critical message. Aleinu, we say it every single day, but we don't think of what we say. We just mumble and mutter it. What does Aleinu mean? Letakein olam b'malchut shakai, to perfect the world in the kingship of God. V'yekablu chulam et ol malchutecha. Everyone will accept the yoke of your kingship. Lafnot elecha kol rishei haaretz, to turn towards you all the wicked of the earth. That's Jewishness. That's Jewish teaching. Not to eat cholent on Shabbos afternoon with kishka or without kishka. That's our task. That's Shavuot. When we are more than just no longer slaves. When we've come to Israel, we've gotten the Torah. We're living in Jerusalem, and we're bringing the first fruits to the temple. We don't say it on the Haggadah. We don't say it in the Haggadah because, as I said, Pesach, we didn't come to the land yet. We certainly didn't have the first fruits yet. But we do say it in the Bible. And if you look at Isaiah chapter 2 and you look at Micah chapter 4, the major goal of the temple is that all nations should come to it and learn from us and follow in our ways. That is the story of Ruth. You know why we count 7 weeks and we bring bread? See, barley, which is the first grain to ripen, is food for animals. Bread is food for human beings. Much more than that. Bread expresses the partnership between God and man. It's fascinating that we make 3 blessings to God on bread, whereas the fruits for which Israel is praised in Parshat Ekev, in Devarim, we only make 1 blessing. The fancy fruits, the pomegranates, the dates, the figs, the foods that make Israel such a special place. Bread 3 blessings, which seems to be so common. Our Rebbe Rav Soloveitchik explained it beautifully. Because the greater the human input and work, the greater the sanctity. And it requires 11 different stages of work. Ingenuity and hard work. To take the wheat and turn it into bread. And we make the blessing on Friday night, and Shabbos too. We put our 2 hands on the challah. Do you ever think of why? So the Mishnah Berurah says, Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam, hamotzi lechem min haaretz. 10 words. Very nice. But the Zohar says it much more deeply and explains that that's why bread frees you from every other blessing. Because bread is the consummate food. Bread is what we do in partnership with God. God wants us to be his partners. His full partners. Ani v'ho Hoshiana. We together with God create the bread. God the raw materials, us the human effort and ingenuity. The same thing is true with wine. You see, Zochreu al Hayayin, remember Shabbat on wine. That's the mitzvah. Kiddush. Because wine has an interesting property. By 3 things, the real person is known. Kiso, kaso, vakoso. How he acts, what he says when he's angry, then the truth comes out. How he is towards money, tells a lot about every human being. And what he says and does when he's inebriated. Harks back to what we said about Purim. If what's going to come out is good, that's great. So you see, bread, according to one view in the Talmud, bread was the bread tree of the tree of knowledge. Second view says it was the vine. Wine. So bread is very human. And wine reminds us that every human being is created in the divine image. And therefore has a right and a necessity to be God's partners in perfecting the world. We, together with God, must destroy the dark places and the places of chaos in the world. That's our task. And the march from Pesach to Shavuot is a march of redemption in every respect. Moving from not being slaves to being full partners with God. Recognizing the power we have because we are free and created in God's image. I want to go one step further. Ruth is a very interesting personality. I told you we want people to come from the outside. And it's important for them to come from the outside. I want to tell you, Midrash Rabbi Shmuel. Why was the Torah given in a Farusia? In a public place, in a desert. Why was it not given on the Temple Mount? You know what the answer is, Midrash to Rabbi Yishmael? Because had it been given in the Temple Mount, the Jews would say it's only ours and it doesn't belong to anybody else. And we believe that the Torah was given to the world. Remember V'zot HaBracha? First, God went to Esav, Edom, and then God went to Yishmael, Har Paran, and God asked, will you take my Torah? They all said no. We were the only ones who accepted it. But we say in the Kedusha every single Shabbat Musaf. That was then. But eventually, in the time of the Messiah, God will once again give his Torah. V'hu yashmienu berachamav shenit le'enei kol chai. This time before the entire world. And everyone will accept the Torah. Because the Torah is for the world. Because God is for the world. Because when you understand Sinai Shavuot, remember I told you that Pesach was DNA of genetics, familial relationship, the family. That was Pesach. Shavuot, when you stand before God, it's not the horizontal relationship of family. It's the vertical relationship with God. And if it's with God, then our siblings are not only our fellow Jews, but every human being, no matter the color. No matter the ethnic background. Look at the book of Job, chapter 31. He says to the master of the Gentile slave who is not being treated properly, remember that one God formed both of you. The one who made you the master also made you the Gentile slave. That both of you came from the womb of the divine Shekhinah. Now let me go back to Ruth. Ruth is very interesting. You know, the founder of Christianity was born of Immaculate Conception. No sex. Our King David, the progenitor of the Messiah, comes from Ruth. Let me tell you something. I used to be the rabbi of Lincoln Square Synagogue. Very good years. Thank God I'm here now. No, really. Thank God I'm here now. But those years were good years. And it was a big mecca for singles. And around my table, there were many, many shidduchim. Because we had people who came from all over the United States. And invariably, I would get a call. And the call would come from parents in Memphis, Tennessee, who were asking about the one that their son or daughter was seeing from Kansas City. And they didn't ask me about the girl or the boy. They asked me about the parents. How was I expected? I barely knew the children. How was I expected to know the parents who lived so far away? But I had a very clear answer. I would say, you want to know about the yichus? Yes, I want to know about the yichus, the pedigree. I said, I'll tell you one thing. 1,000 to 1. Better pedigree than the Messiah. You know what Moav means? Me'av. The product of incest. The product of incest. Lot and his daughters. After Sodom and Gomorrah. There was no CNN. Can you imagine? There wasn't even Fox News. So they thought the entire world was destroyed. So the elder sister says to the younger sister, I'll sleep with Lot tonight, and you'll sleep, our father, and you'll sleep with him tomorrow night, and we'll become impregnated, and we'll start the world again. And the younger sister says, that's disgusting. And the older sister says, but we have to start the world again. And the younger sister says, why? The world is a loser. Look around. God tried with Noah, it didn't work. God tried again, in the beginning of Abraham, didn't work. Certainly didn't work with Adam. Forget it. It was a bad choice in the first place. God made a bad bargain. The older sister says, no, we're created in God's image. That's what our tradition says. Give human beings a chance. We will perfect ourselves and perfect the world. And she won the day. That's Ruth's ancestry, Moab. And I once heard from my teacher, Rav Soloveitchik, one of the most amazing things I ever heard in my life. The belief in the Messiah is not so much a belief in God as it is in human beings and in human nature, in their capacity to change, in their capacity to move and become different. Look at Ruth herself. A Moabite is not allowed to even convert into Judaism. The Beit Din of Boaz decided only a Moabite, but not a Moabitess. She can. Why could a Moabite not come into Judaism? Because they didn't give us bread and water when we were landless and powerless in the desert. They were cruel. But Ruth was the antithesis of cruelty, different from her forebears. Megillat Ruth says people can change. And that's a critical message. And people will change. And the Rambam says clearly at the end of Hilchot Malachim, the entire world will accept the true way. I want to tell you amazing things are happening. We're living in tremendous times. We're living in the time of Shavuot and Megillat Ruth. And people returning in droves. There are tens and hundreds of thousands of people, some of them who are Muranos in South America, all over South America, who are coming back. After 500 years of undergroundness, after 500 years of being distanced because of the Inquisition, etc. We're living in times when lost tribes are coming back, like Bnei Menashe in India near Bangladesh, and the tribe of Dan in Ethiopia. And we're living in times when people from far away. Let me tell you an amazing thing, and with this I'm about to conclude. I received a letter about 1.5 years ago, signed by Moshe and Tarfon. Dateline, Uganda, Africa. Dear Rabbi Riskin, we read your article in the Jerusalem Post every week. We've translated into Swahili. We speak Swahili and English and read Hebrew fluently. In our village of Puti, 149 people have been keeping Shabbat and the festivals and kashrut and family ritual purity for 100 years. We are not yet quite Jews. We want to come to learn in your yeshiva. Love, Moshe and Tarfon. P.S. We are 24 years old, graduates of university. We heard you're a nice man. We don't have money for airfare. I take each of my grandchildren, I study with them a tractate, and I take them on a little, I learn with them, and then I take them on a little bonding trip. And a year and a half ago, when I got this letter, one of my grandchildren was coming up for bar mitzvah, and he wanted to study with me all the laws of conversion. There's a small tractate, Masechet Gerim, and I went through everything with him. And then he also wanted to study with me kashrut, shchita, slaughtering. I can't teach slaughtering because I don't know slaughtering. But there's somebody in Efrat who knows all of these things. Dr. Ari Greenspan. And he taught him. And I took my grandson, Ari went with me too, and we went to Puti, Uganda. The story is as follows. First of all, we found an amazing village. 149 people, men, women, and children, beautiful people. Very wonderful people, very sincere people. They pray every morning and every evening. They have a synagogue. They're building a new synagogue. Everything is very primitive. They live off the land, just what they plant. They're happy people. And about 100 years ago, when England colonialized the area, all of the Africans learned English, and the missionaries came, and they all became Christians. And England appointed someone named Kakangulu to be the shalit, the governor of all of these villages. And he was a great intellectual and a charismatic individual. And he also became a Christian. And he read the Bible that they supplied everybody with. However, he stopped at the Old Testament because he was tremendously inspired by the Old Testament. And he read about the covenant and everything else. And even he began to read the Gospels, and he saw that it looked as if Jesus lived by the Gospels also. By the Old Testament, he kept kashrut, he kept Shabbat, kept the festivals. So Kakangulu asked around, does anyone live by the Old Testament? And he was told yes. The Jews. He had never seen a Jew. But he knew that there were Jews in Johannesburg. He knew that there were Jews in Yerushalayim and Jews in New York. So he dispatched 3 letters to the rabbis of each of those cities. Send us someone to teach us how to live by the Old Testament. Yerushalayim sent a mythical figure named Yosef. Taught them. Lived with them for the better part of a year. He taught one of them then, about 80 years ago, circumcision. And that person's grandson, Uri, is the circumciser today. That's what happened. And these people are keeping everything. There are about 3,000 living near them. This phenomenon is happening all over the world. So we're living in very special times, and we have a very, very special mission. Took him into his home, fought for him, put his life on the line for him. Comes a time when Lot doesn't understand Abraham's ethical monotheism of compassionate righteousness and moral justice, and his henchmen, his shepherds, Lot's shepherds, are stealing. Now, Lot became a shepherd because of Abraham. So when Abraham raised this to Lot, Lot should have said right away, okay, fine, I'll take care of my people. I'll make sure we don't steal. He didn't say that. He said, then we'll part. I'll go my way, you'll go your way. Abraham says, fine. You go to the left, I'll go to the right. You go to the right, I'll go to the left. Lot looks around. And he says, fine, I'm going to Las Vegas. Stone and Gomorrah, but that was what, Las Vegas at least used to be like, I guess. I'm going to Las Vegas. He never comes back to live with Abraham. You know how many sleepless nights Abraham must have had? How much he poured into Lot. Lot's like that fifth son. But you know how Lot came back to the bosom of Abraham? Through Ruth. Because remember, Ruth converted. So Ruth came back into the bosom of Abraham. And when someone comes back, they bring with them all of their forebears. So Ruth is a great persona who expresses the ultimate Jewish mission. To bring God to the world. Everybody, from my perspective, doesn't have to be Jewish. But they have to be exposed to the Jewish teachings. Certainly keep the moral and ethical points. And I think Shabbat and Yom Tov, much better than Coca-Cola, Pepsi-Cola, that they're spreading all over the world. Shabbos will give you a much bigger kick and far, far more benefit for whatever you spend. So in the final analysis, we move from Purim, bare survival, that's diaspora, to Pesach, redemption from slavery, to Shavuot, true redemption, which involves redemption of the world because we are all God's children. May we continue to develop in Shavuot and live to see a peaceful and secure and dedicated world to morality, to peace, to salvation. Chag Sameach v'chol tov.